I still remember the first time I heard her name whispered, Katherine Knight. Not in a courthouse, not in a police briefing, but in the hushed tones of locals in the small Australian town of Aberdeen. They spoke of her not as a woman, not even as a murderer, but as something else, something darker. If monsters wear masks, Katherine's was disarmingly ordinary. A factory worker, a mother, a neighbor who smiled in the shops. But on a cold night in February 2000, the mask fell, and what lay beneath has haunted Australia ever since. Childhood of shadows. Katherine Knight was born into a family where violence was currency and cruelty was tradition. Her father was a man with fists for answers. Her mother, hardened by her own misery, confessed things no child should ever hear. Katherine grew up in the shadow of this household, watching, learning, absorbing. At school, she was volatile, swinging between a shy silence and sudden violent rages. She never learned control. She only learned power through fear. By the time she left school at 15, Katherine had already earned a reputation. The girl who carried knives, who threatened classmates, who seemed to find pleasure in the idea of hurting. And then came the Slaughterhouse, the butcher's apprentice. Most teenagers take their first job stacking shelves or running errands. Katherine's was far bloodier. She became an apprentice at a local abattoir where the air was thick with the copper stench of animal blood and the constant thud of cleavers hitting bone. For Katherine, it was not repulsive. It was intoxicating. She mastered the blades quickly, gutting, skinning, butchering with precision. Management noticed her speed. Co-workers noticed something else. Katherine didn't just work there, she seemed to belong there. Soon she decorated her home with knives, hanging them in neat rows above her bed. She told friends she wanted them ready should she ever need them. It sounded like a joke at the time, but Katherine rarely joked. Love and violence. Her relationships followed the same script, passion laced with brutality. Her first marriage to David Kellett was marked by drunken brawls, threats, and nights where she would wake him by strangling him in his sleep. Once, while heavily pregnant, she burned his clothes and smashed his head with a frying pan for returning home late. Neighbors heard the screams. Few intervened. Later, lovers fared no better. When one relationship soured, she cut up all of his clothes, slashed his car seats, and threatened to kill him. Another man woke to find her looming over him with a knife pressed to his throat. And yet, they stayed. Some out of fear, some out of denial, others because Katherine's magnetism was as strong as her rage. Then came John Price, the final lover. John Price, Pricey to his friends, was a 44-year-old father of three, known as a good bloke in town. He worked in the local mines, loved his kids, and enjoyed a beer after a hard day. He also knew Katherine Knight's reputation. Everyone did, but he thought he could handle her. At first, it seemed almost normal. Katherine moved in with him in the late 1990s, and their lives blended. But the warning signs appeared quickly. Violent arguments, threats, Katherine's obsession with control. In one fight, she filmed items Price had allegedly stolen from work and sent the footage to his employer. He lost his job. That betrayal nearly ended them. But somehow he took her back. By early 2000, though, Price was finished. He told friends Katherine was dangerous. He confided that if anything happened to him, it would be her. He wasn't exaggerating. He was predicting. February 29th, 2000. The last night, it was a leap year, an extra day on the calendar, a day John Price would never live to see the end of. That evening, he went to the pub with friends, laughing and drinking as though nothing was wrong, but everyone noticed the tension in his eyes. He told them flatly, "If I don't show up tomorrow, it's because Katherine killed me." It wasn't a joke. Later that night, he returned home alone. His children were staying with friends. Perhaps, deep down, he knew. Perhaps that was his way of protecting them. When he walked into his house, Katherine wasn't there. She had prepared her own script. Around midnight, Katherine arrived at Price's home. She made herself comfortable, watched TV, showered, even slipped into lingerie. Then she joined him in bed. They had sex, and while Price drifted in uneasy sleep, Katherine prepared the knives she had brought with her. At dawn, the attack began. John Price woke to the searing pain of the first stab wound. He staggered out of bed, blood pouring, trying desperately to escape. He made it as far as the front door, leaving crimson handprints smeared across the walls. But Katherine was relentless. She followed, stabbing again and again, 37 times in total. By the time it was over, Price's body lay crumpled in a pool of his own blood. The house was silent, save for Katherine's ragged breathing. And then the real horror began. What Katherine did next defies comprehension. Using her butchering skills, she skinned John Price with chilling precision. From the top of his head to the soles of his feet, she peeled him like one of the animals she had once slaughtered. His entire hide was left hanging from a meat hook in the doorway of the lounge. Then she decapitated him. The final act? She cooked parts of his flesh, preparing meals with vegetables and gravy, carefully plating them alongside handwritten notes addressed to Price's children. It was dinner with Dad, reimagined as the grotesque banquet of a killer. When John failed to show up for work the next morning, alarm bells rang. Police officers sent to his home were unprepared for what they found. Blood everywhere. Walls, floors, door frames soaked in crimson. A body, headless and mutilated, sprawled in the bedroom, skin hanging like a grotesque curtain. And on the stove, pots still warm, filled with cooked human flesh. Even seasoned detectives staggered outside, some vomiting, some shaking. One officer later said it was the most horrific crime scene in Australia's history. Katherine herself was found comatose on the bed, having taken pills in a half-hearted suicide attempt. She survived. Trial of the century, Katherine Knight was charged with murder. At first, she pleaded not guilty, but as the trial neared, her lawyers advised her otherwise. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she changed her plea to guilty, sparing the jury the nightmare of testimony. In October 2001, Katherine Knight became the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The judge's words were chilling. This was an appalling crime. The crime almost beyond description. The sentence must mark the community's revulsion. Her file was marked, never to be released. Aftermath. Today, Katherine Knight sits in Silverwater Women's Correctional Center, her infamy secure. She is remembered not as a mother, a lover, or a worker, but as something darker. In Aberdeen, the whispers continue. Some say they still see her in nightmares, a figure with a knife, smiling, waiting. Because monsters aren't always born in shadows. Sometimes they live next door. Sometimes they smile at you in the supermarket. And sometimes, just sometimes, they serve you dinner. Please support me grow by clicking on the like, share, and subscribe button